We are at AKINCI Gallery, and currently the exhibition In Addition to Everything Real is at display. And we are going to be talking to Molly Palmer, whose work is part of the exhibition. Molly is an artist in residence at the Rijksacademie van Beeldende Kunsten, and she has exhibited at the Rijksacademie Open and prepared solo shows for 1646 in The Hague and Thai Pulp in Wales. She graduated from the Royal Academy Schools in 2016, where you were awarded the gold medal, and she received the Arts Council England's Creative Practice Development Fund, and she has exhibited widely at galleries and museums in London, in Berlin, The Hague, Miami, Mexico, Sao Paulo, Istanbul, Rotterdam, and Glasgow. Forthcoming exhibitions include the Rijksacademie Open in 2021 and solo shows at AKINCI here in Amsterdam and Bosse en Baum in London. And in your work, you use a lot of handmade props, you use sets, you use costumes, you use these green screen protagonists, and they are layered into video worlds where music, gesture, and dialogue form cyclical narratives that are exploring the strangeness concealed within ordinary things. The fractured narratives that are unfolding within these material environments, they explore the transformative potential of personal belief. They are often seeking resolutions for difficult events such as sorrow, loss, anxiety, mental health challenges, or trauma. Although they are visually very dreamlike, your work is not intended as a fantasy. Instead, it offers a step sideways into these parallel worlds that allow us to examine and enjoy the complexity and absurdity of being human. And to put this a little bit into context, we are now going to watch a work of yours. It's called Apples, and it's from 2016.
I kept seeing this thing in the parks. People in sports clothes were walking uphill backwards. It must have been some kind of new exercise trend. Sometimes another person would walk up the hill after them, the usual way just to get to the top. It produces an odd situation.
Strange sensation.
Two people walking face to face, pretending to be alone. They look sideways as if admiring the view,
Look at the buildings,
when really
look
they
at
are
the
watching
trees.
themselves. I tried both ways, walking through the parks. Uphill backwards and uphill forwards. It worked a bit like a mirror, like sending your eyes out sideways. Pretending to be invisible to someone right in front of you makes you see the geometry of your situation. You look sideways as if admiring the view, and you become aware of your bodies as two moving lines, parallel with the buildings, perpendicular to the sky, that together make clear the diagonal of the hill.
Molly, to start off, what was this film Apples about? And could you tell me a little bit about how you got into video work?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with the film. So Apples actually came about from a residency that I did in Paris. And I was there on my own for just over a month. And after a couple of weeks, I started to get into this very abstract and kind of dreamy state where everything that I saw was kind of fluctuating between the real and the imagined. And I was writing a text at the time called A Long Pause ... which was partly a performance text, but also it was kind of about the unknowable non-things that lurk beneath the surface of the real. And I was collecting evidence from my surroundings about these kind of And it's actually very strange now reading the Georges Perec text that's behind the theme of the infraordinary in this group of exhibitions, because he also talks about what is around and beneath the real, and kind of examining the ordinary as a source of strangeness and kind of a fertile ground for the other worlds that are nested within our own. And so I, for instance, was taking pictures of like drain covers and gratings, which I later learned are in France called souffrier, which means, I think, to breathe. And I'm obviously really interested in this theme of like architecture as a body and kind of the mirroring between what we have inside us and the built environments that we create. But another thing that I observed during my stay there was this phenomenon of people in the parks walking uphill backwards. And I think, as it says in the film, that it was a kind of exercise trend, but it was actually very strange, because what it did for me was to kind of make the angles and the combination of shapes in the environment really geometric and kind of starkly symbolic. And I had this idea the whole time of building a wooden incline and kind of filming this actress walking uphill backwards and kind of making it into like an infinite scroll. And I also, in the buildings in the background, I used some of this symbolism from these like kind of quite boring pictures that I've been collecting. They were kind of like the geometry in like rooftops, the accidental geometry when people build around stuff, and like the same in like paving stones where somebody had like patched together things, and I would like take these shapes and put them into these kind of sculptural buildings. And it's kind of funny because the title Apples actually comes from a whole scene that I didn't end up using in the film, which was a sort of song with clapping about slicing up apples, and kind of, again, another like repetitive everyday task that if you get sort of lost in it, it becomes, like it's peeling off the skin and like slicing up the apple, like becomes this very transportive sort of
rhythmic.
Yes, or you get sort of lost. I'm really interested in these moments in life where things kind of pull out of focus and you're suddenly aware of the sort of construct of everything around you. Like the same with the film, because this film, again, back to the Georges Perec book, he talks about that we don't think about staircases enough. And that was really funny for me to read that now, sort of, what is this, 2015? So like 5 years after I made it, to sort of think, that I was actually making this film about like this moment when you're in the lift in your building and it's something you do every single day, but you suddenly feel like completely detached from reality, and it's something about letting your mind go like out of focus. Wondering. And then all the sort of physical and geometric relations of the space around you become something quite meaningful and kind of productive in terms of the imagination.
And Georges Perec is a writer, of course, and why do you think that video works for you in expressing these thoughts?
So I mean, you did ask me why I sort of started making video, and it's actually an interesting trajectory, because as a teenager I studied film studies and I actually wanted to be David Lynch, but that didn't work out. But then at university I was making films, and then that turned into me making film installations. But after I left university, I actually got quite ill and I was stuck in bed for a long time, and I started to make drawings and paintings as a way of kind of creating these like scenarios. Or at first they were a bit like storyboards, or like not graphic novels, but like kind of episodic images that a narrative would kind of unfold within. But then the kind of backgrounds and the environment started to become stranger and more kind of skewed, and I became very interested in this idea of like an unreal and a kind of I guess like, you know, like MC Escher, like this kind of unbuildable space. And I realized at a certain point, because I was also then writing, and once I started to get well again, I was making music again. And I realized that like all these different threads of my practice could actually be brought back together in my original love, which was filmmaking. But that my, I guess the reasoning and the logic behind these confused spaces that were very much influenced by things like Byzantine iconography and different ancient cultures' depictions of space, that I could actually produce those environments in miniature and in a way that only had to make sense from one angle, so they could be kind of impractical and defy the limitations of space. Also, once I started learning about After Effects and animation, I could then mash together different elements and different textures of video and different speeds of things, and I became very interested in this idea of like a multiplicity of temporality and kind of how, especially with the music, that can pull someone emotionally and imaginatively like into and through these different states of feeling and being.
Yeah.
And I think I've also realized over time that I'm not seeking to illustrate or depict something through my work, that I'm actually seeking to produce the conditions within which someone can like feel the thing for themselves. And it might be something very different to what I intended, but that feeling and that kind of state of sensory understanding is what I'm searching for with my work.
So do you feel like the viewer plays an important role in being part of your work almost?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think with the reason why I want things to be quite obviously handmade is that I think there's this moment of like a suspension of disbelief where people or become like amused or sort of charmed into releasing their sort of cynicism about a scenario, and they kind of want to immerse themselves in that a little bit more. And I kind of like this combination of like humor, like at the beginning of the video here, that there's a moment where the girl like turns to the camera and says like a really short line. It's just like, that's what lifts do, a kind of this like exposing, because the rhetoric is like super like busy and layered, and then she just says this thing that like cuts through it. And it's in a few of my films, not consciously actually, but like in some way that's part of my writing or my development process, is to kind of seek these moments of levity or humor that cut through. And then also once someone has laughed, they're then much more likely to later cry or have like some kind of, like genuine emotional reaction to
that's so nice.
Yeah.
And you also you use a lot of costumes in the videos, but you all made them yourself. Can you tell me a little bit about
shape and like the kind of, I don't know, it's definitely not like the most important thing in the work. I think maybe like it's a combination of, because I usually in the shoot also play music or soundtrack from the film, and then they become like enmeshed in this kind of atmospheric. But I do think that like the feel or the fit or the color of the costume can bring out, especially because I usually work with quite shy people, and then, like can kind of bring out this secret in them. It like unlocks the secret in them, and I really enjoy that.
I can imagine, because the work behind me is called character study, because you're also very interested in this energy that flows. I can imagine it also does to your characters. You say that the energy changes when they wear these costumes. So can you tell me a little bit about that, how you see energy and why this piece behind me is called character study? Yeah,
of course. So it's kind of a complicated question for me, because like some of the older works that you see in the show come from much earlier kind of musings, I guess, about like energy and what is energy and what's the source of energy and how do we produce this like life force that powers us through just really our everyday realities. And I guess that's gone from looking at how we diagram, for instance, the banners in the show, the fabric works, are diagrams of the synapses that in the brain that cause the heart to beat and the lungs to expand and contract. And one of the other copper works in the show is a reference to lungs, the insides of lungs. And then this recent move into making sculptures that I think of as character studies is actually interesting for me, because I had always shown objects like within my video work and never really in the installation. But when I started to show sculpture separately, that was like sculpture in its own right, I then actually started to feel that the process of making the sculptures, where you're working in a much more manual and kind of practical way, was a moment where I was kind of gestating the ideas and the scripts, the music, the lyrics, and all of this, while I was working with my hands, were kind of gestating in my mind. And these kind of wall-based sculptures really started to feel to me like, like character studies, because they were sort of like an essence, rather, it sounds a bit pretentious, but like, it's kind of like a way of like summoning, an energy of, and I think I'm interested to see how that will kind of evolve over time, because in the show that I'm doing at the Rights Open next year, there's one more character study, but now it has copper pipes and also embroidered and painted fabric work on it. And then the character study after that is going to be ceramic with embroidered fabric and like very beautifully glazed ceramic, which is a challenge, but I'm excited. But yeah, I just kind of think I am really interested in the idea of abstracting like an entity that becomes a sort of quite a formal and self-contained thing, but then within the video works it goes back to like a very vital and kind of animated thing. And I'm trying to understand, now that I'm moving into showing sculpture more and more, like what that transference of energy means. And it's interesting seeing these works together, because I think there's always this thing about the transference of energy, like either between beings or between neurons or between, it's this kind of swapping to and fro, and like how that movement is what gives things momentum. But I think
and so you were also talking about this self-actualization, which is could be seen as also a form of energy channeling into a certain direction.
Yeah.
And you are very interested by symbols, right? And how they achieve meaning and can help you with this self-actualization.
Yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit more about that and how that is for you, and why you are so inspired by these symbols?
One of my favorite topics. But yeah, I mean, I think this again goes back to some kind of childhood fascination with the symbolic form and like the mystery of that, like why it had held this weight or had this kind of expectation around it. And I actually have swung back and forth through my life between this feeling of like total belief in symbolism and then like a feeling of total nihilism in the meaninglessness of things. But I think recently I realized, actually through making a work about that dichotomy between nihilism and belief, that it's actually the process of building the symbolism that produces the meaning, because it's the investment of time that goes, the investment of thought and time that goes into producing that form that imbues it with history and meaning. And I also think I'm very interested in like, I guess like occult and pagan and ancient religion, like Egyptian also because, for instance, in Egyptian culture and in occult practices, like ideas of magic and medicine are kind of intertwined, and the act of or enacting a production of a symbol is part of a process of healing or of empowering or of binding. And I think like I've often had times when I feel very lost and kind of confused, and usually in my practice and in life, and I usually that act of producing a symbolic form or sequence, or even like a symbol and sound, has like guided me back to a sense of kind of connection with the world. And you know, not there's always going to be terrible things in the world, but somehow you can like carve out this safe space within yourself where you keep belief in, you know, your connection with the people and the objects and the landscape around you. And yeah, I mean, I think sometimes the symbolic can just be very formally pleasing. Like for some reason, our eyes love like these shapes and patterns, and the geometry triggers some kind of response in us. But I think sometimes they can become like truly meaningful, especially if it's connected in some way to an event or a thought process in your mind. And I'm recently also, I mean, the ceramic piece on the green wall in the gallery, it's called The Plastic Ratio, and that actually came from a video where I was filming above as like a group of women joined their arms in different shapes. And yeah, it was really funny how we had this process. They were doing it to the music for the film, and every now and again they'd be like, "Oh, that's a good one," and we'd be like, you know, why is that a good one? You know, because there was just a feeling of like felt right, you know. And then when I would trace those shapes and then make them into ceramics, it somehow felt like more and more bringing that like out into focus. And I think there's something in that also, because looking at the piece on the wall now, I start to feel like it's almost like an alphabet.
Yeah.
And I love this idea because a lot of my work is about the things that fall outside of language. Like this film is like about the things that you see out of the corner of your eye, like this like slight, like the kind of oscillation of strangeness under the ordinary. And I think this process of like producing glyphs or like alphabetic forms or calligraphy, I'm always fascinated by like other cultures, you know, like the way that they write, and also because of the relationship between language and reality, you know, that there's all this like philosophy that reality emerges through language and all this kind of stuff. And Perec also writes very interestingly about that in this book. And I do feel like sometimes the symbolic form can become a kind of form of communication, I guess. Yeah,
Perec also, I read a little piece of his work this morning, because we were talking about him yesterday. And he was speaking about the world as a language, because everyone has its own vision of the world through memories we collect from every place we see. So he said like everybody has its own reality.
Yeah.
And I have the feeling that with your work you also try to find this extra view on reality. What do you think your like this reality or other realities could learn from your reality?
Oh, I don't know about that, but I think it's, to be honest, I think it's more like creating a space within which people can be like playful about reality also, because I guess I think a lot about this. There's an artist called Bonnie Camplin who she talks a lot about the idea of consensus reality, and kind of that we are all conspiring to agree on this like dominant reality. And I'm very interested in what happens when people deviate from that normative perception, especially through neurological difference or fluctuations in their adherence to like a normative health profile. but I'm also very interested in like other species perspectives and kind of how we are kind of ignoring like all these different frequencies and states of consciousness that are around us all the time.
Yeah.
And I think in my work I just want to kind of wiggle it around a little bit and kind of make... Also, I would never want to like... you know, I'm not making Lord of the Rings. I'm not going to say there's like this complete world in which you can be. It's like actually just more a space, a very like porous space within which people can just let their focus slide a little bit and kind of entertain those echoes from other worlds or perspectives. I'm not saying there are other realities, I'm saying there are multiple realities nested within our own, and I think that's something that's really magical, and the more you kind of remember that, the more you believe in continuing to live, you know? Like then you kind of think, it's so fascinating. I
mean, they are there, so we can all learn something from every version. Well, Molly, thank you so much for this talk. I really enjoyed it, and I am definitely convinced that everybody should feel free to explore your spaces and views on this reality.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your questions.
Thank you.